Well, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you here. I am Dawn Reinhardt-Wood from Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling, I think is our new title. So we're dropping the professions word. Big rebranding. And I am joined by my colleague, Emily Bands, also from the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling. I primarily work in our Institute for Inpatient Psychiatric Rehabilitation, and Emily is with our CSS Community Support Services project, which is akin to FCS in Washington. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can maintain optimism while working in the supportive housing FCS programs in this challenging housing market. We want to welcome you all and remind you that today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. As it's an interactive training, we encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout the session because a lot of your examples really help to supplement the learning. And I think folks learn from each other that way. And I'm kind of bored of my examples, and Emily's probably bored about talking about some of her examples. So we love you to contribute and offer your insight as well. So the slides, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar, will be sent by email in a day or two after the presentation. So our learning objectives for today is to identify challenges in the current rental housing market faced by FCS programs. So again, like if we go over things and you are recognizing some challenges or struggles that you're seeing in the communities that you serve, please feel free to chime in and add that. We would like to identify strategies for maintaining the spirit of progress and recovery during these challenging times. So really, trying to counter any kind of stalling or stagnation or frustration that could happen for not only the individuals that we're serving, but us as providers, right? When we're facing challenges that we don't really feel like we have a direct effect on or a direct impact in changing, we can feel very frustrated. And so we want to look at some strategies that we could use to maintain that spirit and to identify some interventions to use to increase the likelihood of securing housing for and with the individuals we serve. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Dawn. And to start off, we actually have a question for everybody. We just want to hear from everybody on how would you describe the current housing market where you're at? And we considered trying to find some information on how the housing market is out in Washington, but we would much rather hear from you guys and what your experiences are. As people are typing in the chat what your experiences are, I can tell you what's happening here in New Jersey. And it's very similar. Is it Chavana? I'm going to say, if I said that incorrectly, let me know. But it's very expensive and very slim. Absolutely, right? Frustrating. We don't have a lot of housing here. There's still not a lot of available units. And from what there is, it's way, way, way over what our housing vouchers and our subsidy programs here in New Jersey will pay. Marissa, I like this idea of what you're saying in terms of sustainable housing, right? A lack of affordable and sustainable housing. Christine, you said high prices, high standards, discouraging, expensive, and substandard. Thank you, Dawn. Absolutely. Scarce, unattainable for extremely low income households. Absolutely. What I keep hearing from our providers out here in New Jersey is that when they do find apartments, it's just so competitive that's very, very hard to get their clients into the unit to even meet with the landlord or to even see the unit because it's just so incredibly competitive. Christina, you said if you're a homeowner, your home value is dramatically increasing, which is lovely, but that can actually make it harder to find a new place to move. Everything is so expensive. Absolutely. I look at some of the houses in my town even, and some of the houses, they're great houses, but they are being sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars more than probably what they would have been before the pandemic. And that's what we're looking for, Sarah, right? Like just kind of what your experiences are. Nancy, you said rising rental prices, even room rentals being out of reach of many Social Security security incomes. Yeah, it's incredibly challenging. Jennifer, you live in a rural area. Largest county in Washington state, landmass wise, 25,000 people at a 25% poverty rate, little to no housing, and almost zero affordable and sustainable housing. And then absolutely Dawn, right? So there's not a lot of units, but then we have to take into some of these individual factors of the people we're providing services to, right? So credit issues, legal issues. It was hard enough to find housing for those individuals prior to this. Now that this is occurring, it's even harder. And yes, absolutely, right? The screening criteria is strict. So this picture you're painting for me of how this housing market looks is just gray, right? It just looks gray. Absolutely, Tamara, structural barriers, so landlords ignoring fair housing laws. I know in New Jersey, there were landlords who were ignoring fair housing laws prior to this, and now it's just rampant, I think. It's incredibly challenging, right? So how is all of this impacting all of you? Because you all are out there in the field doing the legwork, trying to find housing for the individuals that you're working with. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but how is this impacting you as workers? And as we wait for people to respond, I know how I felt. And the housing market that I was working within was not like this, right? But it was stressful. It was stressful. Tamara, constantly on the verge of burnout, right? Absolutely. You feel like you're letting your clients down, right? We internalize it, right? Because we know that these people are in need and we're here to help and we're here to support, and our hands are tied, right? Anybody else want to share? So Christina, you're making another very good point. Recognizing how little nonprofit employees make. A professional job doesn't equal a comfortable lifestyle. Right, because it's hard for you to find housing for the individuals you work with. But what about all of you out there, right? How are you able to afford housing? Dawn shared something in the chat about, looking at like income, right? Even looking at income levels. How are you able to afford housing?
Yeah, just to kind of like pipe in there for an example, the apartment complex that I live in is the most affordable in my town. And I wanted to stay in my town to be, it was a post separation kind of thing, wanted to be in the same town. And they wanted me to make 3 times my rent as my monthly income as a minimum. And I believe that when I moved in, I did. But as the rent has increased, I know I did not, because my, pay has not kept up with that pace. So I think it's not just an issue for our clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so frustrating.
Incredibly. Thank you, Dawn. Where am I at in the chat? So Nancy, you said always kind of saying to clients, you wish you had better options to give. Jennifer, impacting staff mental health to the point we are losing smart, intelligent, and empathetic staff. In New Jersey, our supervisors and the administrative staff that I interact with are constantly discussing and disclosing the staff shortages here in New Jersey. For our supportive housing staff, it's so hard to get applicants, and then it's so hard to keep those applicants, right? Staff morale is not in a good place. Tara, you said you get frustrated with clients a lot easier where they don't jump on available units or have unrealistic standards. Chanel, you said from a DV perspective, lack of housing forces survivors to go back to their abuser. Washwana, my family has had to use the food banks lately just so we can eat because my paycheck goes to rent and the bills. Yeah, it's so incredibly challenging, right? So we have this intersection of our personal lives, right? Because we're all humans, we all have human needs, we're all human beings, and we have our own personal needs. And these then can sometimes carry over into work and vice versa, right? Because when we're not doing well at work, if we're feeling like we're failing our clients, if we're feeling like we're not doing well at our job, then that's going to funnel back over into our personal life. And then Hannah, you said obtaining and working towards permanent housing seems far out of reach when your community lacks adequate shelter and transitional housing options in the interim. Right. So we're almost like fighting a losing battle here, it feels like, because it's hard to find the units. It's putting a lot of pressure on us. And then the system, right? The shelters, the transitional housing options, they're not there or they're not working. And all that pressure does come back on us as workers, right? So I don't want to dwell on this too much longer because I want to move to a more positive space, but I wanted to give you all the opportunity to talk about this because it weighs on you. And I can tell through our discussion here in the chat that it's probably weighing on a lot of you very heavily. And this is important, right? Because stress and burnout, they impact us, right? So when we think about this idea of stress, we're talking about this worry or tension that is caused by a challenging situation. And when that challenging situation is our job, that's when we feel burnout, right? That's when we feel this worry or tension specifically related to a person's job. And I'm wondering, and all of you out there can let us know if you feel comfortable. But what are these are the different signs of stress and burnout? And are any of you identifying with any of these? And I think Dawn wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick. That the other thing that I think really impacts when burnout is partnered with this idea of moral injury. There was a lot of talk about that during COVID, right? Like nurses or people in healthcare suffering from this phenomena of moral injury when you see horrific things happening that are antithetical to your moral fiber and the way that you think the world should operate in a good sense. Like housing people, like not allowing people to be on the streets, right? Like actually making sure that housing is affordable for all, not just the elite. And I think that so when it's burnout and when we're talking about like basic human rights to be safe and to live and for you to have that base layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs fulfilled so you can start to work on like those other higher level goals, it can really just decimate somebody. And I think drive them out of the field completely, which is what we're seeing in New Jersey. People are leaving and going to Amazon because they can make just as much money with less stress.
Mm-hmm. When I want to say this was maybe sometime in 2021, I remember being on a phone call with CSS or supportive housing supervisors here in New Jersey. And one of the supervisors was talking about how the staff they had just hired had put in their notice because they got a job at Dunkin' Donuts. And Dunkin' Donuts was going to pay them a lot more money than what the agency was able to pay them. They were going to have more flexible hours and they wouldn't have to deal with the stress, right? Because nobody likes the feeling of going to work every day and feeling like you're walking into a brick wall over and over and over again. It is incredibly challenging. Um, so I want to highlight what Jordan's saying in the chat. So Jordan said, I find that the housing situation that Jordan's in, which is a room for rent, and other low cost options that employed and more privileged peers are able to make work are really dependent on our ability to present ourselves well, communicate professionally, and navigate technology to streamline our housing research, right? Because now that's a really good point. I want to pause there for a second, because in order to locate housing or to locate resources, we need to be able to use technology. We need to be able to use the internet. We need to have a good internet connection. We need to have a smartphone. You need to have a computer, right? You need to have access to these resources. Jordan said skills that Jordan hopes to support participants in learning, but the time and the right environment to develop. Many of Jordan's participants will not have a change in income that expands their options and are not able to win landlords and potential housemates over the way they need to see the same success, right? So a barrier that people are facing is maybe a little bit of discrimination or stereotypes around people with mental health conditions, lack of access to those resources, and then their mental health condition, right? So I know somebody in the chat earlier said, just kind of feeling frustrated when people are not like jumping on some of these opportunities, right? But if and I'm not saying that this is what is exactly happening in this situation or the situation you were referring to specifically, but when you're experiencing symptoms of depression, if you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety, if you're, actively experiencing symptoms of psychosis, it can be hard to want to navigate and to jump on some of those opportunities.
Could I comment here too, Emily?
Sure.
It might be unpopular to say this, but I've even had a couple of clients that I've worked with who I absolutely agree with Tara. Clients should have the absolute right to be picky. And I've also worked with individuals who, I hate to use the word typical, right? But atypical from maybe what we traditionally think of as individuals who wind up in this situation in terms of like having a past career or having a college degree or something like this, and really coming into a situation where they are shocked by the limitations in terms of the housing that's available to them because they may have lived another lifestyle at some point in time. And I know that was always very difficult for me, because absolutely the person has the right to be selective about where they're going to live and call home. And at the same time, I know I struggled with like, how do I best support them in making a decision that at the very least gets them off the street or out of the shelter? And that was always very difficult for me to stay, to regulate myself and stay respectful, as a case manager, and, really kind of let go and allow that person to choose their fate in a way, right? That's very difficult.
Absolutely. And I think it's hard because like I think similar to what you're saying, Dawn, I think regardless of what your life was prior to now being in this moment where you're having to choose between, a room for rent or a 1-bedroom apartment, or that's like 500 square feet, or a studio. I think so. I worked with a lot of people who kind of had this moment of like, how did I get here? How did I get here in this moment in my life where now I'm having to make this choice, and the choices in front of me are not what I want. They're not what I want. They're not remotely what I want. I want to go back to this other place in time. It can be hard to really work through and process some of those feelings. It's an incredibly challenging situation for the person, and it's also a very challenging situation for us, right? Because like Dawn said, we're battling with our own thoughts and emotions and feelings, which we're going to have because we're humans. And all of this is going to impact how we're working with the person, and also impact how we're viewing our jobs, right? I mean, if we look at some of these signs of stress, how many of you are feeling these signs of stress? How many of you are feeling these signs of burnout? I think for me, I was at the point prior to coming to work in this department, when I was still working in the field, I was burnt out. And I didn't truly recognize it until I got into this job and I started doing something different. And I realized, oh my gosh, I was incredibly burnt out and just not happy. And a lot of it did have to do with my job because it was very taxing. Um, it was hard then, and I can't imagine now working through a pandemic and working through this housing market, right? Having to continue to move forward. It's just very hard and challenging. I'm going to stop talking for a second to see if anybody wants to share anything in the chat. I definitely hear that. Anastasia, I'm going to say. It's hard when sometimes clients can only afford $500 a month and their only option is to get on a wait list for housing, which can take years sometimes, and support them in the meantime. Right? So you all are in an incredibly challenging and difficult place, right? So how do we keep going, right? How do we keep going when we're hitting this brick wall? And this is where optimism, hope, and resiliency can come into play. So when we're thinking about optimism, we're thinking about this general positive attitude towards life and trying to keep this general positive attitude towards life. When we're thinking about hope, we're looking at this motivational state where we're focused on this potential positive outcome, right? So we're trying to find the best of the situation. And resiliency is our ability to adapt to adversity in a situation. And I think that these three, I don't know if characteristics is the right word, but these three concepts, I think, can be helpful in our journey through life in general, but also in this incredibly challenging time with the work that you're doing. And that's what we wanted to focus on here in this webinar, right? How do we find this optimism? How do we find and maintain this optimism and this hope and this resiliency? And that's what I want to talk about now. So when we're thinking of increasing optimism, the first thing that you can kind of focus on is mitigating stress and burnout, and trying to, one, understand and acknowledge that that's how you're feeling. And two, then trying to find ways to work through this stress or to cope with this stress. The other thing that can be helpful when we're trying to become optimistic is to focus on our strengths. Now, when we think of strengths, the agencies that you're working at, would you say they're strengths-based? Would you say that when you're working with individuals, you're focusing on their strengths and you're supporting them to understand their strengths? Right, absolutely. Washwana? right? Helping them to feel empowered, right? It was part of our assessment here in New Jersey is when we're going through the assessment, we're actually asking people what their strengths are in certain areas of the 8 dimensions of wellness. And it's always a very interesting conversation because many times when I would be facilitating the assessment with somebody, I would ask them what their strengths were, and they'd be like, "What do you mean?" Washana, thank you so much for doing that. Because I've been called Emil for most of my life when it's Emily. I don't like saying people's names wrong. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. But it was always very challenging when I would ask somebody what their strengths are, and they would tell me, I don't know. And how disheartening is that, right? To ask somebody what they think their strengths are and for them to not have a solid idea of what their strengths actually are. And then Christina, you said, sometimes, yes, we do a lot of problem solving based on what can be done. Absolutely, right? And I think our strengths can play into that, right? Because our strengths can help us when we're trying to problem solve and we're trying to figure out how to work through a solution, right? So think about it. If communication, though I don't think this is the case for any of you out there because of the field you're working in, but if communication is not your strength, right, that's probably going to impact how you try to resolve any type of situation because that's not your strength. So you probably wouldn't focus the solution around communication. My question for all of you out there, though, is do you all think about or recognize your strengths? Or when was the last time you reflected on your strengths?
I know we have some strong people in this meeting, so it shouldn't be hard. What are your strengths, Emily?
I'm actually going to show you my strengths in a couple of seconds, Dawn.
Okay, yay.
And yeah, Washana, right? It's hard to recognize your own strength when you're centered on helping your clients see theirs, right? But
We don't want to stay in that centered state around our clients 24/7. And that's the biggest struggle, I think, and I'm sorry for just jumping in there, Emily,
okay,
but
Dawn.
I felt the need to say that to Washana. I think it's like so many of us who get into this field and actually stay, we're in it for intrinsic reasons, right? Like something is driving us. It is also probably meeting some kind of need or allowing us to pour our talent, our skills into helping people. And it's hard to disconnect from that mode. So I just wanted to say that, but it's essential.
I appreciate that, Dawn, because it's that analogy of if your cup is not full, how can you fill others? Right? If you are trying to constantly fill everybody else's cup and you have nothing left in yours, how can you go on? How can you continue? So it is so important for us to be able to take care of ourselves and to focus on ourselves sometimes. And I think self-care is, and we're going to talk a little bit about self-care, so I'm not going to knock self-care, but I think self-care can look like some of the things that we do in terms of like hobbies and activities. But sometimes self-care can also be recognizing the things that we're doing right already. So when looking at somebody in the chat said trying to self-improve, right? And I think as human beings, we are constantly trying to self-improve and kind of be better people and be the best version of ourselves, and that's okay. But we're all still good people where we're at now. And sometimes it's also helpful to recognize those things. Um, and and thank you, Christine, right? So you agree with Christina's comment. You look at what I need to improve compared to looking at what I'm great at, right? And that's where that balance can be, right? It's okay to have this idea of, I should eat more fruits and vegetables, right? Or I should, listen and be more present in conversations with family and friends, right? But at the same time, I also already have a lot of strengths that I'm actually going to share with all of you. But I take the silence as that maybe this isn't something that a lot of you have necessarily considered. So I want to share a resource with you. And it is the it's the Institute on Character.
Yeah, we actually didn't we present this last month or a couple months ago when we did the supported employment in supportive housing one. So if this I'm just saying, if this looks familiar to anyone, you do, I believe, have links to this from previous trainings also. It's really cool. Sorry, Emily, I just get
That's
really
okay.
excited about VIA.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And what I personally really liked about this, so I did this earlier today because I wanted to give you all an example. And what I really liked about this was I liked that this was something that didn't take a lot of time for me to do. The questions are incredibly easy to answer. I will say that there are a couple of questions. It took me, I want to say between 5 and 10 minutes to do. But the questions are easy to answer. They make sense. It's funny. Somebody said earlier that you can find a silver lining in almost any situation. That was actually one of the questions, funnily enough. But once you register, you can create an account, you take the survey, it actually gives you your strengths. And Dawn put it in the chat box. And what I love about it is it doesn't just give you 9 strengths, it actually gives you 24. So I have a whole PDF of what my strengths are. And some of these I don't know if I necessarily even thought of as a strength. So in looking at gratitude, which is apparently my number 1, I didn't necessarily think of this as a strength until I took this and thought to myself, well, yeah, I guess this is a strength, right? Being able to understand and kind of be thankful for all the good things in my life, that very much is a strength. And I would say this is very true to who I am as a person, right? So gratitude, fairness, honesty, humor, love of learning, hope, judgment. It was actually really humbling in a way for me to read some of these because I took this survey a very, very long time ago. I would say probably like 6 to 8 years ago. So it's not something I thought about very recently, but it was a really good experience for me to take this. So I guess I want to get some people's feedback though. Like, is this something that you might be interested in doing? Like, do you feel like this is something that might potentially be helpful for you guys, especially seeing what some of the strengths might look like for you? Thank you, Nancy. I think it can be nice, right? It can be nice to really think about the good things we have about ourselves. And I love how you said, and how valuable we are to the world. Because you all are valuable, right? You're valuable to your friends, you're valuable to your family, you're valuable to the individuals that you provide services to, you're valuable to your organizations. And it can be really hard to recognize that in the moment when you're trying to find housing for somebody and it's not working. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share about this? Oh, Christina, don't compare. um, so Christina, thank you for sharing. So you said you're having fun comparing your lists. Your number one quality is leadership, and it's such an integral quality for my work and life roles. Um, so I love that. I love that that's your number one strength. Um, because I think it very much again is in alignment probably with who you are as I guess in your personal life and how that kind of envelope how that overlaps into your professional life. So that's really interesting. I think this is and I don't know if there's any other anything else you'd like to share about, since you've done this, Christina, but again, it's a very easy, it doesn't take a lot of thought. It took a couple 5 to 10 minutes. I won't say a couple of minutes. It took 5 to 10 minutes. You can do it on your cell phone. But it was really interesting to read through the list. And I think it was good to acknowledge just some of the good things about myself, right? Because we all have strengths. And I think we do get very focused on the clients and who we're working with on their strengths, but it's also important to recognize our own. When we're growing up and we're in school or when we're like children, typically there are people in your life, hopefully, fingers crossed, that are telling you all the good things about you. You have teachers that are maybe telling you did a great job, or maybe parents and other loved ones or friends. But as we get older, we miss that, right? And I hope your supervisors are all out there giving you positive feedback. But sometimes we don't get that as much as adults. So I like activities like this because it's a nice little pat on the back that reaffirms who you are as a person and how great you are. So the other thing I want to talk about is self-care. Because when we think about stress and we think about burnout, self-care is incredibly important. And I know that that's hard. I'm not saying that this is easy, but in order to keep that balance, in order to ensure that side of stress and burnout is not overwhelming that side of happiness and safety and those good positive feelings, we do have to take care of ourselves. So I really want to ask everybody, how do you take care of yourself? And I have some options on the slide, but I'm also wanting to hear what other things you're doing to take care of yourselves. So maybe it's spending time laughing with loved ones. Maybe it's focusing on eating well. Maybe it's taking your paid time off. Hopefully you have paid time off and you can take it. Maybe it's just taking like a 5-minute break, a 10-minute break and just going outside. I'm sure the Washington weather is beautiful this time of year. I went there in September a couple of years ago and it was beautiful in September. So just taking a break. Maybe it's exercising, moving your body. Maybe it's setting healthy boundaries at work, right? Maybe it's making sure that you're leaving the office at 5 o'clock, or making sure you're going into work at 9 o'clock when you start instead of starting an hour early. Maybe it's getting enough sleep, or participating in a hobby, or participating in some good supervision with your supervisor. So Karen, you said, or I hope it's Karen, or maybe it's Corinne, you let me know. But you said my husband had declared I have self-care Wednesday where he runs me a bubble bath when you get home. And next week is vacation for me. So first I have to say, that is so incredibly sweet. So incredibly sweet. I love to hear it. Um, and next week is vacation. I hope that I hope you have a lovely vacation, and I hope it's a very good time. What is everybody else doing for self-care? Karen. Okay, thank you. Dawn, what are you doing for self-care?
I was just going to chime in. I, when you asked that, immediately what I thought of is, okay, people, I'm not the crazy squirrel lady, but I kind of am right now. I'm already the crazy cat lady, so that's okay. I do only have one cat though, living with me. I started like just kind of cultivating this relationship with a random squirrel in the neighborhood, who I'm convinced now is pregnant because she's also really interested in gathering nesting material and not just nuts anymore. But like, I actually find it really calming, and I think using my strengths of like bringing calm and patience to a situation, and I find like it's just very beautiful, like seeing this little creature start to trust me, right? And now she'll come up, she'll take the food from my hands, she'll hop up on my lap. And it's because she runs really quickly though. I have to pretend I'm dead basically, Emily, for her to come up. But it's like it because I don't have direct care experience anymore with individuals, in this field. I feel like I'm getting a little bit of that part of the work that I miss back. And I think it helps me with my sometimes burnout from my current job.
Mhm.
Right? Like, and it also reminds me of some of my strengths, patience,
Right.
love of animals, and that kind of thing. That's what I'm doing. I'm forming a relationship with a pregnant squirrel. That's what Dawn is doing.
I'm just envisioning you sitting there like this,
Yes, that's it. Yes.
like just
If
waiting
is
for
a
this.
board. Yes, that is it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's actually something I look forward to, even, right? So like hopefully I can use those positive feelings, and maybe it'll help activate me to take like, maybe I'll start to go for walks and find more squirrels, but that's where I'm starting.
And I think I love that thought process, right? Like, I'm just gonna start here. It doesn't have to be anything more. It doesn't have to be anything less. You're just starting there. And if it leads up to something, then fantastic.
And
And if it
what it
doesn't, you have a
also
squirrel friend.
right. And what it also does for me is I'm more observant of nature in general
Mhm.
when interacting with her. So it's getting me back connected with nature.
Mhm. And it's funny because there's so many people who are talking about nature and a nature like activities in the chat box, which I think makes a lot of sense given your location out in Washington State. I personally, when I think of Washington, I think of the woods, though I know that your state is not just all woods. Um, so but I love that. I love that for all of you, right? So time in nature, right? So camping, hiking, kayaking, outdoors time and therapy. Love therapy. Samantha, you said hiking, camping, tubing, gym, spending time in the outdoors. Absolutely. Um, Seth, you said you find that if you're working with a participant and you reach an area that you feel you're not as strong in, then you'll call your coworkers who you feel are better in that particular area, and then having good communication, working relationship with other people in the company you work for. We're trying to do work in team building exercises, right? I love working on a team. Um, and we very much, I think, have that in our department, whether that be the small little teams that we work on. Dawn and I don't typically work together. But Dawn and I make a great team because we do and have had opportunities to work together. So I love that because it's nice to be able to have somebody to support you, right? And Dawn has strengths that I don't have. So it's always lovely for, I think, the both of us to be able to get the other person to chime in. You read to calm yourself and get out of your head about life and chaos. John, I love that. Leaving work at work when you go home as much as you can, and snacks. Everybody loves a good snack. Christina, I love this. So you make taking sick days a priority. Being there when your kids are sick is better for your family, your mental health, than being at work when your kids are sick, right? Because then you're focused on how your kids are doing, of course. Everyone is better when you can focus on what's really important to you. It's even more important to you than taking sick days when you're unwell. Washana, you said you built in nightly meditation along with blocking out time on your calendar for each task you need to do, including your breaks. I also have a sign in your office door that says, remember your boundaries, and have other affirmations on your desk to help you ground or center back to your home base throughout the day. I love that. Allie, you said create something. You believe that everyone has some element of creativity in them, and the process of creating something brings peace and self-confidence. Art, music, food, plants, crafting, something else, spending time each week creating something is so powerful. I love that. And I'm so happy that you brought in some ideas and options that aren't necessarily intrinsically creative, right? So food, cooking, getting a good recipe and playing around with flavors and textures and colors and different foods. I love that. Plants, right? Taking care of plants, crafting. I love it. So I will share with everybody. I've actually started doing like stitching, like kind of like needlepoint, I guess, is what I would refer to it as, but I don't think that's necessarily the term for it. But I started doing that a couple months ago, and I'll do that during like when I have some free time. And it is so calming. It's so relaxing. It is mentally stimulating in a way that other activities for me aren't, because I'm not that great at it. I'm not that good at stitching. I'm constantly referencing different videos to figure out what kind of stitch I'm doing. I'm constantly making mistakes, having to pull the thread out and put it through. And I don't think I'm doing things 100% the right way, but it's so nice to have something that is so challenging, but also so very calm and relaxing at the same time. So I love that. And I 100% agree with your thoughts on creativity, Allie. Absolutely. And absolutely, Dawn, right? Green spaces are important to mental health. What were you going to say, Dawn? You unmuted yourself.
I was just trying to envision what you were doing, and I'm picturing like some kind of embroidery or something. And
yes,
that is so difficult. When I was pregnant with my child, I decided I was going to take up knitting or crochet because I felt like it would be calming, and it actually got me so frustrated and raised my blood pressure. And I still have all this yarn and knitting needles and stuff. Latch hook is more my speed, but I love that you're on the adventure of embroidery.
So I will share with everybody. This is what I am making. This is it. This is what I have. This is like 3 months of work.
That's beautiful. Wow.
I got it on Amazon. It's a pack of 3. This is the first one. But again, like trial and error, lots of mistakes, but I love it, right? It's mindless. And it's just nice to do, right? And yes, thank you for telling me the word, Dawn, because I know it's embroidery and I see embroidery videos all the time, and I think of it as needlepoint because I think that's what my grandmother used to call it. So I never say the right term for it. So thank you. Chandler, you said spending time in or near water is a big part of self-care for you. Cuddling your pups as well. Absolutely. I take walks with my dogs almost every day. And I go to a park where there's a trail and there's woods and we commune with nature and we love it. Oh gosh, Allie, I'm sure that there are people much, much more talented than me, but thank you. But it's so important. And I love all of these suggestions. I love this conversation that we're having right now because everybody has different interests. Everybody has different ideas of what self-care looks like for them. And I love all of the ideas that you're coming up with. And I'm hoping that for those of you out there that maybe aren't sharing, if you're stuck, if you're unsure of what you can do for self-care, my hope is that maybe some of these activities, will pique your interest maybe, and maybe you'll try something out. Even if it's just going to a local park and sitting by a lake, with a snack maybe, because snacks are always great, right? So we talked a lot about us as workers, and the things we can do for ourselves to help us maintain this idea of optimism, right? We want to have hope. We want to have this resilience. And I think all of you are incredibly resilient because you are adapting to this situation. You are very much trying to, go with the flow and just support people in the best way that you can, even when the housing situation isn't working. But the first step, I do really believe, is taking care of yourselves and really focusing on how you can fill your cup up, right? So then you can fill others. So definitely try the strengths activity if you can. Really very much think about some self-care activities, because this is what's going to help you to reduce your stress. And once you start working on reducing your stress, hopefully you'll feel a little less burnt out. On the front, though, of the work side, right? So something that you can do that I'm sure a lot of you are doing already, is hopefully maybe working with landlords. So again, I'm sure this is like a review and things that you're already doing, but I did just kind of want to reiterate this. And just the importance of, when you can, being able to build and maintain those relationships with landlords, because the landlords are the ones who control the housing, right? So in building and maintaining these relationships with them, it's going to hopefully positively impact the individuals that you're working with. So when thinking about building relationships with landlords, one, it begins when a person starts the application process, right? So as soon as that person gets that application, trying to start a relationship with the landlord at that point, and then continuing that engagement process. So I just want to ask everybody, because I think we're doing really great at supporting everybody here and sharing your experiences. Excuse me, how are you all building relationships with the landlords in your areas? What are you doing? Sometimes our agency would send people fruit baskets. Typically our supervisor was the one to really build the good engagement relationship with the landlord, whereas direct care staff didn't typically do that. So how does that look at your agency, if you don't mind sharing? And Dawn has some great feedback for everybody. So Christina, you said having weekly meetings, checking in on current clients, right? So really keeping that dialogue open, and having good conversations with them. Dawn, you said you created a list of landlords who were easier to work with than others, especially for individuals other landlords wouldn't take a risk on. Staff added to it as the years went on. It really helped us support each other, and especially newer staff who hadn't had the time to build connections in the community. Absolutely, right? So your agency just kind of compiled this list of names. And those, it sounds like, were your kind of go-to landlords.
Yeah, and especially for individuals who maybe were like literally on the street, and we wanted to get them off the street, but we had like these, a lot of concerns, because in Burlington County, where I am, our shelter system was essentially really, really low budget motels, right? The no-tells motels, I called them. And situations where like maybe somebody just needed a room, and we may know, someone who they may not officially, it's probably bad, but they might not officially be known as a landlord, but there's someone who might be willing to rent a room to someone and would agree to come up with a lease and that kind of stuff. So like even some of those like non-conventional, like solutions to problems that case managers have found, we kind of like even added some of those solutions, so to speak, not that they always work out, to that little kind of 3-page handout.
Right. And I could see how that would be so supportive, like you said, for some of the newer staff. Because I can't imagine for somebody new coming in, it's like, okay, here's your person and they're homeless and they're in the motel and now you have to find them someplace to live. And it's like, what do I do?
And I don't know about you, but like, as I like worked in my programs for a while, I like, when I left that organization, I was there for over 17 years. And so I could meet a client and sometimes I would immediately start thinking such and such landlord would be a great, fit for this person, or this location would be a great fit, and like, so that person just coming in may not have that same knowledge base just from experience or lack of experience.
Right. I love that, Dawn. And I think that that being able to build those relationships, and really being able to nurture them, if that's a good word to use, like as almost as like the leader in your organization, I think let me rewind for a second. So being in that role, and that more leadership role, right? It sounds like you were the best person to kind of build those relationships and kind of maintain those relationships, and then being able to almost refer to the staff that you're working with.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying. Yeah.
And let them know that we don't want to ruin any of these relationships, right? We want to grow this list. We want to preserve, we don't want to just preserve this list. We want to grow it. And so by doing that, like, we also had to, others said it in here, like, we had to continue to like build that rapport, Allie said, with those landlords. And so that, when they have a friend or whatever who's also in the business and they're like, man, I'm having a hard time filling this apartment building, they might say, hey, you might want to try those people over there at such and such organization, right? Like, because they have people to fill your apartment building. Mm-hmm. So it really did help us, grow that housing resource kind of database.
And like Allie did say, right, like that networking aspect of it, because landlords know each other, right? And I want to highlight what Allie said in terms of going to the Young Professionals Network Club and your Chamber of Commerce to build relationship. That's an excellent idea. I don't know if other people are doing that, but I think if I were working in the field now, I think I would start doing that, because that will give you the opportunity to be able to, be face to face with people. It can also be hard, in this place in this place that we're at with technology. You can build relationships virtually, right? As we're doing, but sometimes you want that face to face. Sometimes you want to be able to see the person and be able to get to know them face to face. So being a part of some of these organizations is going to help to do that. And then you said you lease 14 different locations around the area, and developing and maintaining strong relationships with your landlords builds a rapport to their other properties. Absolutely, right? And we have this in New Jersey. I'm not sure if this is also very common out in Washington, but we do have landlords that are a part of larger property development, right? So I used to, in one of the buildings I worked with, the property manager who I worked with in one building was also the property manager of like 3 or 4 other different buildings within the community that I worked in. So I was able to go to her, and if the building that I primarily worked out of didn't have a unit, she was then able to refer me to, oh, well, we have a unit in this location and we have a unit in that location. And that was something that was really helpful. Also, networking with other agencies and points of contact for housing helps you to help our clients. I think that's what some providers in New Jersey are looking to do. Work more collaboratively with each other instead of competitively with each other, to try to support everybody in finding and locating housing and trying to locate landlords. And then Dawn, you said, we also told our landlords if they had any residents facing eviction to contact us. If they didn't have a psychiatric condition, our program couldn't help them, but we could possibly connect them via referral to other help in the community. Landlords appreciated that because it prevented a couple evictions. Yeah, and I think a lot of the landlords I worked with, and I don't know if this is the experience you all have, but a lot of the landlords I worked with didn't want to go to court. They didn't want to go to court. They didn't want to have to deal with an eviction. They didn't want to have to go through the paperwork and the process. It was more of a hassle for them. So being able to be a resource, a community resource like that, I'm sure was helpful. Right? They just wanted the money. They just wanted the rent paid. They wanted their back rent. They just wanted the money, Dawn. You were correct. So once we have and built these relationships, right, we want to work to maintain them. And these are just some things, again, I'm sure all of you are doing these things, but just some points I wanted to highlight around how to continue to maintain these relationships with landlords, right? So part of being able to maintain these relationships with landlords is then working with your participants, working with the consumers that you're working with your clients, right? So helping them and supporting them in their role as tenant, providing them education on their rights versus just abiding by the lease, right? So reviewing the tenant rights and laws and protection within Washington state, which I know is different than what we have here in New Jersey. Educating the tenant on how to understand their lease, and then also teaching advocacy skills and advocating for the individual. And I did want to highlight this because I think sometimes when we think about maintaining relationships with landlords, we think about some of the things we just talked about, right? So, offering them resources, building those relationships and the engagement process, but maintaining those relationships also funnels into this idea of working with the individuals that you're working with, because unfortunately, if the participant in their tenant role is able to maintain their apartment to the liking of the landlord, then that's going to reflect well on your organization, and that's going to make the landlord want to continue working with you. So it's kind of like a twofold kind of situation. So there are things that you want to do on your end, but there are also things that you want to do with the individuals that you're working with. How do you all work with your participants? I see somebody in the chat, a couple of you using the word participant to describe the people that you're working with. So how are all of you working with your participants to be able to maintain their apartment, abide by their lease, use and learn those advocacy skills? What are you all doing on that front? Okay, so Tara, you said that when individuals are in transitional housing, that's when you're assessing skills. And I'm assuming trying to strengthen individuals' knowledge of skills, so that when they then do transition into more permanent supportive housing, they have the skills to be able to utilize. I like that. It's interesting. It seems like transitional housing is much more prevalent in Washington state than it is in New Jersey. in New Jersey, we have a small amount of transitional housing programs. So a lot of the individuals we're working with, they don't have the opportunity to go into a transitional housing space. They go right into permanent supportive housing. So there can sometimes be a lot of trial and error around their daily living skills and other apartment related skills. So Washana, your role is a little bit different as a DV community advocate. You're the one who's helping to connect them with housing programs, resources. So it sounds like you're doing a lot more case management type, more of a case management type role in terms of linkages and coordinating some of the services that you're referring to. I got you. And then as we're, oh, hold on, Christina. So Christina, you said you make welcome letters for new clients and exit letters to instruct on the best way to leave, and regularly refer to our program participation agreement signed by both clients and our partners. Anything to help keep everyone on the same page while in hotels so they can do the work with their case managers to find permanent housing. Right. So again, doing some of that coordination, and a lot of informed consent, it sounds like a lot of letting the individuals know the information that they really need to know about what expectations are, to just provide support on that end. I love that. And as we're wrapping up, just some different resources. So for you as supportive housing staff, we have the HUD Exchange Housing Search Assistance Toolkit, which is tips for working with landlords. For landlords, we also have some information we wanted to give you, and this is an article from Forbes on 5 tips on building better relationships with renters. But we thought that this might be an interesting read for you, because it gives you an idea of maybe what landlords are looking for. And then just some tips for your renters, some tips for the individuals that you're working with, right? So 12 tips for being a great tenant that landlords love for apartments, and the WFLP property management, how to be a good tenant. I know in New Jersey, we have a truth in renting PDF that our state puts out, that focuses on tenant rights and the laws around renting. I'm not sure if Washington State has something like that. But if you would do, I would also definitely recommend making sure that the individuals that you're working with also have that so that they know their rights. Before we're wrapping up, does anybody have any additional comments, feedback, anything else to lend to the conversation before we go? So that's a really great question, Washana. So I actually did try to do a little bit of research on that. And don't quote me on this. Because honestly, from what I was trying to read, it's a lot of mixed messages. I mean, I saw some things from months ago that said that, at this point in time, kind of coming up to this point in time, the market's going to start getting better. I saw some things that said 2024, going into next year, the housing market might get better. That's what I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed for. But I would just, if you can, be on the lookout for that information, because I honestly don't know, but I do hope that the housing market does improve soon. Because when you think about it, we're talking about like, we're going into 3 years of this now, 4 years of this. It's exhausting. Have you heard anything, Dawn?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'm not a fiscal researcher, right? Especially not on the housing market. I struggle to understand my 403 or 401k. But I have been seeing, because I'm a renter, and so my rent just keeps going up, going up, going up. And I want to know for my, when is this going to slow down a little bit? And they were talking about how it's tied to like the interest rates. So like are things like if you wanted to get a mortgage, if you wanted to get a car loan, right? It's becoming more and more expensive to take out loans. Percentage rates are climbing. And that's, kind of tied to so many things such as housing, right? So if landlords are refinancing and things like this, everything costs more for them to do business too. So I think it's like we have to wait for that to stabilize.
Right.
I don't know. We'll blame inflation.
I think there's a lot of things you could
I don't
blame
even
on.
know what inflation is, but we'll blame it.
Mhm. Any other questions or comments or things you wanted to share before we go? You're very welcome. I'm happy to hear that it's been validating. I think that's what Dawn and I really set out to do. Because although we're not in the thick of it, we know
How it feels.
somewhat. Yeah, we know what you guys are experiencing, and it's isolating.
And we also know we don't have solutions for curing the housing market crisis, right? So it would be silly to insult your intelligence and waste your time by doing that. So if you can feel better in the job that you are in during this time, then I think validation goes a long way. I think it does. So hopefully you all felt validated.
Yeah.
Your experience.
Mhm. Well, we would just like to say thank you. So we appreciate your time, your attention, your participation and engagement today. You guys were a phenomenal group. Again, we hope that this time change was maybe helpful. If it was not helpful, you can let us know or let Washington know. If you like this time, if you like this kind of lunchtime time, that's great. We'll keep doing it at this time. Just let us know. We'd love to hear that feedback. I just want to remind you before you go that the slides and a link to the recording and how you can access the recording, as well as other resources, are going to be sent out through a follow-up email. Washington does send out that email, so hopefully it'll come in a couple of days. And also don't forget to check out the Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS, upcoming training events, as well as the FCS website, because I think, or the Washington DVHR website. It's a really great website. A lot of good information. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop the recording.